And yeah, we about to give you game. Shout out to Steve Train. Real estate disruptors. They cannot touch us. And yeah, we about to give you game. Shout out to Steve Train. Jump on the Steve Train. We about to give you game.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us for today's episode of Real Estate Disruptors. Today we've got Brett Snodgrass and Brian Snider with Simple Wholesaling, and they flew from Indianapolis to talk about how Brett was able to transition away out of the organization while the team still does 300 deals per year. If this is your first time tuning in, I am Steve Trang, founder of the Offer Fast Homes app, the only MLS for off-market wholesale properties, and I'm on a mission to create 100 millionaires. We do have our workshop coming up next week. If you guys want to see if you qualify, please go to disruptors.com/workshop. And if you get value out of the show today, please tag a friend below, comment, share this episode, whatever you can do to help. That way we can all grow together. And this is a live show, so please ask your questions for Brett and Brian to answer. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So first question is, I'll start with Brett, is what got you into real estate?
Yeah, well, thanks for having us on the show, Steve. Appreciate being here. First time to Phoenix. So,
really?
Yeah, I love it out here. It's warm. It's like 90 today. So it's awesome. But I pretty much just start back in my journey. I grew up in Indiana. My dad was a teacher. He was a high school basketball coach. My mom was a early childhood teacher as well. So we didn't come from money. No entrepreneurs in the family. But I always kind of had that knack. I guess I always liked to count money. I had my piggy bank out. I count my little pennies and quarters. And I would remember even in middle school, I would sell candy at school. So I'd always had this entrepreneurial thing going on. And just kind of lead me up. I went to college. I played basketball in college, which I know you're a baller. You're talking about that.
Not in college level.
But that was kind of my life. I graduated college with an elementary education degree because my parents were teachers, and I didn't know what else to do. But I always kind of had this entrepreneurial mind. So I started reading some books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Millionaire Next Door. Just some of these books started to come to life, and realized that a lot of millionaires became wealthy through real estate. So I was online one night and I found this house for sale in Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, for $9,000. And this was 2007. And I was like, man, you can't buy a house for $9,000. That's crazy. But we did. And my dad, he had about $5,000. I had about $5,000. And we ended up buying that house, and we sold it for $15,000. Made $6,000. And that was the first deal. And after that, I just said, you know what? If I can do this with one deal, could I do it with 1,000 deals? And then 13 years later, I think we've done 3,000 plus deals. It's a pretty awesome ride. And I met Brian 3 years ago. Well, we were family friends, not family, our wives were friends, and we used to just kind of hang out a little bit. And he was a teacher too, so I really like teachers. And he kind of joined the team 3 years ago, and then this year he now runs the company, runs the show, and I've stepped out more, and it's been an amazing journey, Steve. I appreciate you just asking. It's awesome.
Yeah. So before we get any further, so you did your first deal in Ohio, not back home.
Right. You bought it on eBay, right?
Yeah, I bought it on eBay. That's when eBay was cool.
So you bought a house on eBay as your first deal.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then did you continue to do eBay, continue doing Youngstown, or when did you transition to home?
Yeah, well, I was looking through eBay, and I didn't even know eBay sold houses, real estate. I thought eBay sold, kids' toys. I don't know. And but they did. They sold real estate, and I found these cheap houses, and I would really just find the cheapest houses, and a lot of them were in Youngstown, Ohio, or Ohio locations. And I did that for a while, and I would buy in those locations. But then I realized, you know what, could I do this close to home? And I started figuring out Indianapolis was an amazing market, and I could do it close to home. And that's when we kind of pulled out of Ohio and started doing Indianapolis in our backyard. And then now we strictly do Indianapolis, Indiana.
Gotcha. All right. So how about you? How did you get into real estate?
Yeah, I got into real estate basically through Brett. I was graduated to become a teacher. I was a teacher for 14 years, and really I was supposed to become a principal. And once I started doing stuff to become a principal, I realized I did not want to be a principal. Like, it's not.
He's gonna have a big paddle.
Yeah. So I realized, like, hey, if you are to become a principal, like, it's basically any decision you make, like, half the people are gonna like it, half the people are not. And that is not my personality at all. Did not like that part of it, and realized I didn't want to become a principal and wanted to do something else. And really, he and I, like, we knew each other. The funny thing is, like, our group of friends, there's about 8 to 10 of us that were pretty close friends, 5 couples. We always hung out, and the funny joke was, like, nobody knew what Brett did. It was like, oh, he does something in real estate. He flips houses, or, you know, he's on one of those HGTV people, or, you know, something like that. And we never really knew what it was. And so Brett and I went out for breakfast one morning, and I kind of told him, like, hey, I'm going to teach for 1 more year, and, you know, then I'm done. I got to find something else to do basically within this year. And he said, well, we just let go of somebody that's doing our marketing, and, you know, we might be coming out with an education course. Would you be interested in doing that? So I was like, yeah, let's do it. And it was really just kind of on a whim, and took a job like the next day. We were like, okay, we had a conversation, like, are we serious about this? And ended up taking a job with him, and really from there, I didn't know what wholesaling was at the time or anything like that. But
is that a good way to hire someone? Steve, you're in sales. Is that a good way? Hey, just have breakfast, hire your friend who has no idea what you do.
Yeah. Generally, no. And even hiring friends, I think in general is also probably not a very good idea.
Yeah.
But if you really know each other really well, and you know that he'll fit, we'll still have him take the profile, right? So have him take the PI. But
I don't think you took a PI, did you?
No. We were really like we kind of knew of each other, but not really. We weren't really that close or anything. So, but it's worked out.
Yeah,
so.
It's worked out this time, but there's other times it hasn't worked. So
right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So what was it that you saw in Brian where it's like, okay, he'll be a good fit for this role?
I think that he was a hard worker. Seemed like he worked really, really hard. I knew he was in teaching, and I was a teacher, so I kind of knew that. But he was also kind of led different associations he would talk about with his organizations, and he kind of the teaching, I don't even know what you call them, but some of the teaching organizations.
Yeah, I've always been a leader in whatever I've done, like, you know, fraternity president and, you know, captain in any sport, and you know, it's like I was a coach when I was teaching and stuff like that, and you know, even coach other teachers and things. So I've always gravitated towards leadership, and we've talked a lot about that stuff, and just what leadership means, and kind of, you know, an entrepreneurship of what that means to be a leader and things too. So yeah.
So you were naturally a leader. Did you take anything to become a leader? Like, did you take any courses? Were there any books that jumped out, or are you just naturally driven to be a leader?
So a little bit of both. You know, I think I've just naturally been, you know, drawn to that, and I've kind of just always gravitated towards that. I've never been one to kind of be quiet in a room, but not in a negative way, I think. But also just like as I've, you know, worked through my master's and stuff, I took a lot of, you know, leadership classes to become a principal, and kind of coaching stuff as well to, you know, become a better coach and all that things too. So there's been some
masters in education.
I technically no. I've done everything I need to. I just naturally never went to do it because I ended up like not realizing I wanted to become a principal. So
got it.
I kind of did everything to get a master's, but never actually finished it.
Could you have stayed a teacher if you didn't want to be a principal, or you just knew that you
it was ready for me to do something else. I had I did it long enough that I was ready for something else.
Got it.
So,
yeah. And to be quite honest, I didn't know. I had a job to fill, and he filled.
That was your hiring method. Then it was basically like, oh, you need a job. I have somebody that,
And so. I didn't know if he was a good leader. I mean, he really started off. We were going to be putting out an education course, and I knew he was an educator, so I was like, oh, this is a good fit. And we kind of pulled the reins on that after just a few months. But now he showed leadership once he came into the business, and kept showing leadership again and again, and that's when he became, you know, moving up the ranks.
Gotcha.
So.
And you know, something I said before, not often, is that I actually wanted to be a teacher.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that. Okay.
But I saw how much teachers made.
Yeah. Well, that's how he really got me. I said, well, if you can match my teacher's salary, and that's basically nothing. So he's like, oh, I can do that.
And I was like, in the real estate, and he was like, well, yeah, I make this. And I was like, okay.
Done.
I think you still tried to lowball me a little bit.
So this is about 3 years ago. You've been doing it for 13 years. So you had this ride up until you connected with Brian.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what that ride was like. You know, you were buying on eBay, and then you eventually moved closer to home. What was that journey? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So the journey was, I bought that first house in 2007. 2008 was amazing. I went from literally a substitute school teacher making $10,000 to $15,000 a year, and I think we did 150 deals in 2008. So everybody else is running for the hills. Real estate is terrible, and I don't know any better because I'm just young. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I'm buying all these cheap houses, and it was great. But I didn't ever know how to run a business with it. I didn't know how to hire anybody, obviously. I didn't know how to fire anybody. I didn't know any systems. It was just basically me. And my dad, he retired early from teaching to join me, and we were kind of partners for about 6 years, right? So fast forward, this was in 2014. I was doing some other things. I was fixing and flipping, and I was doing some owner financing deals. I had a couple of rentals, and I was really, really stressed out, honestly. I had just gotten married, 2 years in my marriage. I had a new son, and I was getting sued by a contractor, and I had some of these flips that were just going really the wrong way, and I was losing money. And I realized, man, I can't do this anymore. I just want to go back to wholesaling, and I just want to chase deals, and it's simple, and I want a simple business. And that's when I said, I'm just going to do this business. I'm going to call it Simple Wholesaling, and that's where it started, honestly. And my first hire was a friend of mine, and I sat down with him at Cracker Barrel, and I said, hey, you know what? I heard about these people writing these letters and sending them in the mail and getting deals. Do you want to do that? And he said, sure. So he needed a job. So that was my first hire. He wrote these letters handwritten on these notebook pieces of paper, and I kind of went from there. And then honestly, it scaled to other people started saying, what are you doing? And I started hiring my acquisitions manager, a dispositions manager, and really kind of did everything the wrong way. I didn't know any systems and processes, but our culture, I think, was really, really good. And I was a very honest person. I wanted to do things the right way. People trusted me. And I think that's really where we started to grow, even though we weren't doing things totally business-like, but our culture was like, man, I can trust you guys. And that's where it started to grow. And then Brian stepped in, and that's when kind of the processes started.
What would you attribute to developing that culture? I mean, because, culture is something that we throw around every once in a while, but like, how did you engender that culture? What contributed to it? Were you able to attract people that liked your culture?
Yeah. Well, number one, I'm a man of faith, so that's kind of like big for me. So I always want to do the right thing and treat people the right way. And then a little bit after I hired a couple of people, another friend introduced me to a business coach, and he read this book called Scaling Up, and he took me through that, right? And that's when I really learned how to run a business and my core values, and said, you got to have core values. And I was like, what are core values? I don't know, like I'm an honest person. But he took me through the process, and we started making goals and rocks, and that really changed the game, right? And that's when I started to learn how to hire people. And he told me, and he said, you can't just walk around a building and be like, oh, you look cool, let's go. and that's when that just all helped me.
You just can't grow.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So Scaling Up, that's an incredible book. So you got the culture, you got the core values, and then at some point you partnered up with Brian. So we were kind of talking about what it was that created this bond where you guys partnered up. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, it really came back to, I think when I moved, I was living in Columbus, Ohio, and moved out to Indianapolis like 6 years ago. Brett and Karen were like one of the first couples that I met and started hanging out with. We both were former basketball players and kind of bonded over that. We got every now and then for, a beer and watch a game and hang out. So we kind of bonded over that. And then we decided to play in this 3-on-3 basketball tournament. It's Brett's idea. Let's do it. We hadn't played in a while and stuff. Like, we'll be okay. Yeah. And it was like, 5 points into the game, like he tore his Achilles. Yeah. And so it was so we lost the game, number one. That was like, but I was teaching at the time. It was summertime. So really, I think I took you to maybe like 2 or 3 doctor's appointments, and we really didn't know each other that well, but we kind of bonded over that and just kind of got to know each other. And so then it became regular for us to meet, once every couple months to go out for breakfast or, still go out for a beer or something like that. And so then the opportunity kind of came around and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So it's funny you say like in the very beginning. I think when I blew my Achilles, it was like the first 2 minutes of the game.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to touch on real quick, it's a tangent, because you're talking about basketball, you're talking about leadership, you're talking about basketball. Something that I haven't talked a lot about is that a lot of the leadership skills that we learned came from playing basketball.
Yeah.
Right? Being on a team, corralling a team, getting that guy. I mean, a lot of it's like verbal abuse. But it's like, run back on D, box out. What are you doing? Why aren't you guarding your guy? And it's just a lot of like It's a lot of commanding.
Yeah. I mean, as a point guard, I was a point guard my entire life. I mean, I'm 5'6" right now, so I don't think I've grown since 6th grade. But I've been a point guard my entire life. Like I had to run the offense, I had to run the defense, and I mean, I remember my high school basketball coach senior year, like during our end of the year like banquet and stuff like that. And he's like, I think Brian knows me better than my wife does, because he didn't have to say what play. Like I knew it, and that's part of being a leader to me. So
yeah. And I grew up in a coach's house. So my dad was a high school basketball coach in Indiana. So it's a lot different probably now here. High school basketball coach in Indiana is pretty legit.
I mean, they made a whole movie about it.
Yeah. We were that movie. Hoosiers.
You were Jimmy Chitwood.
Yeah. So. My dad was Norman Dale. And so I still use my dad's principles today. Still, even he would say things like, "Hey, Brett, you're either going to get better or worse today at basketball. What are you going to do?" And I'd say, "Well, I want to get better."
Yeah.
And so I use those same things in business or in life.
You're constantly sharpening the saw.
Yeah. And he would say things like, "Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent." So I would, just like shooting a free throw, the more you practice, the more it just becomes repetition. And just like deals, like when I did my first real estate deal, I was scared to death, right? Yeah. I mean, you probably remember your first deal, and I couldn't believe we were going to make $6,000, and it was just so scary. But now I don't even think about it. I haven't looked at the last 1,000 houses, and I'm like, well, whatever, it's just a deal. So anyways, it's just kind of, the more you practice, the more permanent it just kind of comes in your mind. So totally agree. Basketball skills and just the lessons.
Yeah.
It's been cool.
So let's talk about, so you guys joined forces, and Brian this year took over operations. So let's talk about that. How do you go from working in the business to eventually just sitting in the owner's box? And not that you're not doing anything, but you're not as heavily involved, which I think is kind of like what everyone's dream is, and what everyone thinks they're going to get when they get into wholesaling, and it doesn't. It takes many, many years of failing to get there. So let's talk about what that transition was like in handing off the reins.
Yeah. Well, I actually did a talk a couple of weeks ago just about this topic, because I think you're exactly right. I mean, people start businesses, a wholesaling business, for freedom, right? They want to make their own hours, their own time. But then most of the time later, people complain because they have no freedom, right?
Right.
That happens. So, that was just a thing. I always... you go through seasons of life, and in the last couple of years, one of my goals was to get out of the day-to-day operations of the business. And this year hits 2020, and I remember we're sitting down with our business coach, and this was kind of highlight key number one. So Brian, he's coming up with the vision of this year, what this is going to look like, and he's describing his ideas, and I'm kind of sitting over here, and our coach looks at us, and he says, "Brett, do you even want to be the visionary of this company?" And I thought about that, and I honestly didn't even know that was an option.
Yeah.
Because that was like the visionary or the CEO. That's like the pinnacle, right? That's the top. You don't get anywhere else. So I was like, can I even do that? Is that something I can do? And he said, well, yeah, it's your business. If you just want to sit in the owner's box, you can do that if you want. And then that's where it kind of entered my mind. So fast forward March, COVID hits, shutdown orders are here. And I remember having that thought that this could really hurt our business. It could even take us out. We could totally just crumble and fail. And I had a relief come over me, thinking I would be okay with that, possibly, if we diminished down to just a few people, and that was our business, right? And that's when I realized that I was not the visionary anymore.
Yeah.
And I needed to get out of that seat. So called up Brian. I said, Brian, I got to have a heart-to-heart with you. Here's where I'm at. I've lost some of the zest, some of the passion. I'm not as hungry as I was 13 years ago in this business. I still want to do things and create things, but I feel like I'm not the visionary. Do you want to take the reins of the whole deal? And I'll sit in the owner's box, and I'll be your biggest fan, and you make the decisions, and you can bounce ideas off of me, and I'll be honest with you, but it's your deal.
So you're kind of like the chairman.
Yeah.
Right? Like
he's my board of advisors. One person. He's my one person
so they
board.
Go back whenever they need to make an important decision, they'll go back to the founder or the chairman. But that's really the level of involvement.
Yeah.
All right.
And a lot of times I don't have to do that because I want to empower them. So my answer most of the time is, well, you decide. What do you want to do? And most of the time they already have the answer.
Right. They just want that confirmation.
And that's something I've had to learn. And as a CEO and a visionary for many years, that was been the biggest challenge, is letting go.
Sure.
Letting go. And that takes time and courage.
Yeah. I hear that a lot from a lot of the other when we were in CG, right? A lot of the guys talking about like delegating, and it's hard for a lot of these guys.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's kind of funny of, kind of just coming back to that story of last year, we set our vision and our goals for this year. And our goal was by the end of 2020, we wanted Brett to be only working 20 hours a week. So that was the goal to get there. And I asked him, actually, when we were at CG, we were just driving around, and I asked him, like, so, like, how much are you working? Like, are you under that 20 hours? And he was like, oh, I'm maybe at, like, under 5. So I was like, great. That was a relief for me of, like, okay, now, like, it was kind of at least like, okay, I feel like I am doing this. I'm doing what he needs to be done, and I'm carrying out his vision, and we're doing pretty well. So,
Yeah, that's awesome.
But you also have to really let go, and a lot of times your ego gets in the way.
Sure.
Especially people, this is your baby, right? It's like someone taking care of your kid. It's very, very difficult to let go of that. Number one, I knew that my face wasn't going to be in the company as much anymore, right? At all. My decisions weren't going to be, the decisions that were going to be carried out. My vision wasn't going to be, even our core values, they're talking about, hey, should we switch our core values because our vision is starting to change because they're the visionaries now. That's just some things, and I have to be okay with that. And if you're not okay with that, that's when the ego, I'm the man. My face needs to be in the commercials or whatever. And I had to let go of a lot of that, honestly.
Yeah. Well, another thing, a lot of times like that, especially that if you were the owner and you started the company and things like that, when you start growing a team and all of a sudden it gets to the point where maybe you don't see that you will end up being the bottleneck in that business a lot of times. So like when Brett came to me and he said, hey, let's have this serious conversation. Would you be interested in that? Like, honestly, it was kind of a relief for me because I was like, okay, now things are going to happen a little bit quicker. And that's, the thing, it wasn't nothing against him. It was just it was just like, it was one extra step that I had to do, like of just asking confirmation, making sure it was okay. And, through that conversation of like, I can just go with it and roll with it. And so that was a relief for me. And it's kind of funny too, just on, I think it was like the June or July CG when it was virtual. And, Brett like kind of made I think Brett was on there and he talked about like him getting out of the business and kind of, announced that and stuff. And I got it. Literally my phone blew up from a bunch of other like COOs in the business. Like, hey, you need Brett to talk to my owner, like right now, and, like, have that conversation and stuff. So and I see it right now, even with the CEO, I'm always asking, the two guys on our leadership team of like, hey, you guys have to be completely honest with me. If I'm ever slowing something down, you have to let me know. Like, I'm trying to be very aware of that.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really good point because I actually had this conversation this morning with one of my operators, and he's like, how much involvement am I supposed to bring you in? I was like, none. Like, just make the decision. Yeah. and the analogy I gave was like, you come to a fork in the road. How do you know which one's the right road, which one's the wrong road? And the answer is you don't. You just pick one. Yeah. And if it's the wrong road, you just go back.
Yeah.
And so, but.
And that was the big thing for me too, is a lot of times guys have said, you have to stress test your business. And I didn't know what was going to happen. Yeah. I mean, this whole thing, this could be tumbling right now. And I'd be like, that maybe that was a wrong decision. But I was like, you know what? Let's just find out. Let's just roll the dice. Maybe it works. Maybe it doesn't. I'll give it 6 months. I can always step back in if I have to, but maybe it's worked out amazing. And I think John Maxwell is talking about kind of that. He says the leader shift and, talk about sports. And I think that's the natural progression, as a lot of times as visionaries, we are the bottleneck because there's people on your team that want to lead, but you never let them. Yeah. And you're like, no, I'm going to stay in this because this is my business, this is my baby, and I built this. But I was fine with where the business is at now. If we just keep doing the same thing, I'm fine. But what if they want to grow it? Like, and now I'm allowing them to do that if that's what they want. Right. So
we talked about delegation was one of your challenges. Were there any other challenges in handing the reins over for someone that's listening that wants to, that's dreaming about doing this? What are some other challenges, unexpected hurdles?
Yeah, I think one of the things with us is just us being able to be open and honest with each other about stuff, like, helped us out a lot. Like, I can remember like a conversation, like a month ago, like Brett sent, we closed on a deal and the buyer just sent an email back and just said, hey, thank you so much for this transaction. It went well. And he just, sent an email and was just like, hey, or thanks a lot. I think it was just something that simple. I just gave him a call right away. I was like, you can't do that. Like, by you doing that, you are now going to usurp anybody on our team. Like they're gonna, if they buy a house from us again, they're gonna reach out to you. Like you just, you've gone past our dispo guy, you've gone past me. So it's like little things like that you never really realize. He was just being nice and like, oh, thanks a lot. But it's one of those things of like, hey, if you're gonna be out, you're gonna be out, or if you're gonna be in, you got to be in. So
it blurs the lines, it confuses everybody.
Yeah, for me, there was a lot of things, a lot of emotions, anxiety. At first, June 1st hits, and I'm not in any meetings anymore. No one asks me any questions, and you feel a little like, what am I supposed to do? I'm a little lost. Who am I? Because your identity gets sucked into it. So I went through that. But time heals, right? And you start to just be someone else. So an ego was a big thing. I talked about letting go. There was a time, I think I've done this like 10 times, as I start to write an email to Brian. Like there was a deal that I still look at the deal sometimes, and there was a deal I was like, I didn't know if I liked it. So I started to write this email, Brian, this deal, I don't know if this was very good. And I just erased it. And I said, you know what? That's not, it's their thing. So I had to learn that. And a big one thing for me is, I've heard this a lot, is going through that guilt complex. It's a lot of people feel guilty because they own the business, they're still making money, but they're not working in it, and the other people are working and they're still making money, kind of like that. And I had to go through that. So I had to kind of get over that, where you like, hey, I built something where they have this great opportunity, and now they can lead, which they love doing, and I still take a lot of the risk, right? It's still my risk, my name on the company. So I had to go through some of the guilt as well, and those are some of the feelings you go through. But once you get past, and it's just like anything, you just learn something new, and it's a new chapter.
So you had mentioned your coach. Who's your coach?
So we started off with a guy out of Indianapolis doing the scaling up. I worked with Will Ditzler for 3 years, scaling up. And then the last 2 years, we worked with Gary Harper out of Sharper.
Yep.
And him and his wife, Susan.
Yeah.
And they've been great.
They're coming down here actually next month for me.
Awesome.
There you go.
Yeah. So let's talk about your challenges. And I know you mentioned one where, he sent an email.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous of Brett to do that.
How dare you?
Guys.
So, I think a couple things of, one of them is just like making sure like all the professional accounts are taken care of. And I think as entrepreneurs, you don't really know all the things that should be done even. And
professional accounts?
Just like all the insurance stuff, all the, workers' comp, or all your contractors, like they have all that stuff. And that's things that like kind of, he and I really don't know much about that. And we kind of just like, oh, whatever happened, everything was okay. And we kind of went with it. Luckily we brought my wife on team. She's been a senior director of HR for, 15 plus years. And she like kind of is helping us button up all that stuff. But it was one of those things of like, I didn't know that language. I didn't know what was going on. And he was kind of, not to call you out, but he was just kind of a little passive about that a little bit too on some of that
It's
stuff.
just something I hate doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think all entrepreneurs and visionaries, that's the stuff you just hate doing, so you just put it on the back burner.
So I think it's something
someday.
that,
hopefully nobody gets hurt.
Someday we'll take care of that.
Yeah. So, and then I think another struggle is really just coming into of like, oh wow, like now I'm responsible for, Ronnie and his family. Like how this business does, like is Ronnie gonna be able to have a paycheck next? So I've kind of a couple moments where it's like, wow, okay, I'm the man. I got to take this on, and now I got to make sure that everybody and their families are eating, and that they're healthy and they're safe, and they have money to survive. So I think that's been something that I think right away we were doing really well, and and everything was okay. But then you have like, you have a rough week, and it's like, oh man, all right, okay, I'm responsible for this now. Let's get it done. So that's a struggle that is out there definitely.
Yeah.
And I think we were sitting in our coaches meeting too, and we had all these boxes of what everybody was, in charge of and kind of managed. And Brian was in like over half of the boxes because I took all of my stuff and kind of shoved it over to him. Plus he already had his own responsibilities. Plus he's taken on more. And I think that's one of the learning things he's had to come through too, is just like he can't be in charge of everything, because I know what that's like. And it is pressure, and it's stress, and it's anxiety. These are things people don't really talk about, right, on this show probably. But, it's not like, you have to make all these, big decisions. But when you start to pile all this on you, it's just it just weighs on you, right? And I don't want him to get that. I don't want just to shift all of my stress onto him either. So I think that's something I'm always, conscious about as well.
Sure. So one thing that comes up in our mastermind as well is, I will ask every once in a while, I was like, when's the right time, or do you offer equity, right, for someone to handle operations? How do you guys address this? Because it's something that's come up multiple times within my organization. How did you guys handle that?
Yeah, I mean, these are questions that people have asked me too, that even before I had that conversation, I went in my mind, I got mentors and I started asking them like, hey, what could I do? So all these options came up. I could sell the business maybe, but could you sell a wholesaling business? Could you sell it to the team? Would that be an option? Could you give up equity in the company? Or could you, still maintain 100% ownership, but just slice up the profits to the leadership team more? If they grow it. So that's what we did. That's what I kind of talked to Brian about. That's what I offered him. So it's one of those things. I think it just depends on who your team is. Again, one thing that I think as entrepreneurs we underestimate is the risk. And some people might be risk adverse. Like if something goes bad, maybe they don't want to be on the hook with that whole deal, right? So I just kind of carved it up where I do a lot more profit sharing bonuses. They're going to make a lot of money this year, which is awesome. And that's just what I did. Not saying it's right or wrong. It's worked out for us.
So it worked for us. And going back to that first, breakfast or that first hiring that we had is like, we started having that conversation like, wow, this is going to be the awkward conversation every time of like us talking about money and like being friends and, things like that. But, we've gotten used to it now. And like we're pretty open. Like I said, we're pretty open and honest with each other about that. But I think coming into what we've done, I think this is one of the things that we've been able to do to like help empower other leaders within the business too, of having them step up and giving them some more responsibilities with more opportunity to earn throughout. So it's not just all on me, but it's on all of us as a team and things. Yeah. So it's worked out really well.
Yeah. And I'm really excited to have you guys here because I want, we've had a couple of different people come on where we're talking about visionary versus integrator. I want people that aren't, are still working their way up. This is not a visionary integrator conversation. This is Brian going from is basically the operations, and Brett is not even a visionary. You're there, you see what's going on, but you're not plotting the course anymore. You're no longer directing the ship. You're on the ship. You've got maybe like a chair, like something to sit outside, like a lawn chair. Yeah. But you're not directing the ship anymore.
Yeah,
so this is a completely different situation.
It is, and if you actually look at Brian's profile, which he has taken profile tests now, he has a lot of visionary qualities, honestly.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, but he has a lot of operational qualities, implementer qualities too. So really, and our team's not a huge team. And that was one thing, I had to get over too. We have 6 local people. We have 6 virtual assistants. So, we had about 12 total people, but it's not a huge team, right? So right now he basically is both. He's basically the implementer and the visionary. And if you look at sports, I'm sitting in the owner's box, and he's out there. He's directing the plays and calling the plays.
He's the GM coach.
Yeah, and he's doing all that. And then the owners, I'm sure the coach doesn't like it if the owner comes back down there and is like, "Hey, why don't you run this play?"
Take it easy, Jerry Jones. Like, my thing. Yeah.
So I'm just sitting up there, just rooting my team. Go.
Put the first rounder in there.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Very cool. So one of the other things we talked about was because I was curious to you guys about the branding, and I made the comment, and I'm sometimes very direct. It's like, that's a very interesting name because you guys are acquiring more than wholesaling. But you kind of mentioned there was a reason why you guys went down with Simple Wholesaling. You want to share the name or the idea behind the brand.
Yeah, and I'm not very good at this. You're probably a lot better than I am about branding, Steve. And
why don't you talk about some of your other business names before you talk about this one?
I had like Indiana Luxury Homes and name company after my daughter, Kaylin and Company. Anyways, that's fun. But basically, for me, I just wanted a simple business. I've had complicated where I was trying to just do all these different things, and it was just too complicated. So number one, I needed it just a simple. I'm a simple man. I wanted a simple life. So simple was huge for me. And wholesaling, not saying that we've never assigned deals and we've got them on our contract and assigned them. We have done a lot of that too, but we just said our model now is just taking them down and then cleaning them out and then selling them. So we do more of the wholetailing model now for us. But we do wholesale too. But it was more also too of we love bringing value and educating people. And in our business, we educate wholesalers too. So we have a meetup in Indianapolis that we're educating wholesalers. And that was one thing I always wanted to get to. And we're kind of putting some of that stuff in place is Simple Wholesaling can also educate other wholesalers.
Sure.
So.
And I think that was, when you started that, and you actually started like right before I kind of started in things, and I kind of took that over. But, a lot of people kind of gave us some flack and said, what are you guys doing? You're training your competition. And really what that ended up doing was kind of doubling our business.
Yeah.
So we were able to, help other wholesalers and kind of teach them along the way, but also be that buyer for them when they, maybe they want to walk through the whole deal with us, and we'll do that. Or they just there's a little hair on the deal and they can't figure it out, or they're starting off, so their buyers list isn't that great. So we've always been there to kind of help out, and we're, I think actually last year we were the largest buyer in Indianapolis, for cash deals and stuff. So
well, I think it goes back to, you mentioned John Maxwell earlier, right? Like leadership is an idea of abundance, and your abundance, you're giving, and the more you give, the more you receive.
Yeah, exactly.
So it works really well. So I have shut down my meetup since March because of COVID. I don't want to shut it down, but I also don't want to be like, there was 150 people at your meetup.
Right.
And we can say that was a super spreader event.
Right.
So what are you guys doing?
So we're doing everything virtual right now. So there is like some RIAs and things in Indianapolis that are meeting in person, but we just went ahead and went all virtual. We didn't have to worry about like taking temperatures and doing all that. But I think it's just the smart and safe thing to do right now, just to be okay. So we have a Facebook group just called Wholesaling Made Simple, and so we're putting out different vlogs and different videos and things on each and every day. But we just do our meetups virtual through there, and that's kind of how we've done it. And so we've still been able to gain have some traction with that and be able to work with other people. And it's not ideal, it's not the best, but at least we're able to still give back in some way. And we have a lot of people that are reaching out to us still, and we're still working deals with them and helping them out in any way we can.
What's your engagement like in that online Zoom?
It's our meetups, we got to the point where we were like having about 80 to 100 people, every month, and that was pretty good. We were pretty happy with that. The RIAs in town were getting like maybe 140, so we were like right there, and we felt pretty good about it. The engagement with what we have on there, we'll maybe have 20 to 30 people, be online with us, but then we'll have, you get to see a lot of people that watch it afterwards and things. And there's people that are, asking questions. We're able to offer some answers right there on the spot and things. So like I said, the numbers aren't great of what we really want it to be compared to if we were in person, but it's still there. So we've been happy with it.
Yeah. And I'm just asking because I'm kind of going through that situation. Like, do I want to do this online? It's like, no, not really.
Yeah.
It is always tough when you're like watching, like when you're usually in front of a room of like 100 people, and then like you're watching it online, you see the little eyeball up there, and like there's 15 people in the room, and now there's 21. And it's like, all right. But I've always been told of like kind of like, hey, if there's 20 people that are watching it live, there's going to be 5 times that watch it afterwards and things. And that's kind of held true. So knowing that helps out a little bit.
Sure.
I think the biggest thing that Brian has brought to the table is consistency. So if you know my personality, sometimes I start something, I'm super fast just to jump in, and then kind of wavers a little bit, right?
Shiny object. What is it?
Yeah. But he's very consistent, and it's kind of rubbed off on me too. It's like, hey, this isn't ideal, but are we at least kicking the ball down the field, getting the first down, whatever, and just continuously moving forward. And I think that happens a lot with wholesalers, with people who start podcasts. You see how many people start podcasts, and 20 episodes later, they just, I don't feel like doing that anymore.
Yeah, they fizzle out.
Yeah, same thing. And just so if you're doing anything, I think that what we've been able to do is we've been putting this meetup on for 3+ years. I have my own podcast that I've been doing for 4 years. We have the Indie Investor Pod. We're on episode 65 or 6.
Yeah.
So just trying to be consistent with whatever you're going to do.
So I want to hit on that or emphasize this because Tucker Murray, who was on the show not too long ago, and he said that when he started that podcast, he didn't think anything was going to come of it. And it's been a huge source of business for him. What has been your experience with podcasting? With local podcasting. Yeah, when all the COVID stuff hit, we were worried right away of like, we need to help out our buyers and make sure our buyers list is as strong as it's ever been. That's kind of what we thought right away of like, inventory is going to be great, buyers are going to be tough. It was the exact opposite that actually happened. But we kind of had that idea of like, hey, let's kind of come to that educational heart as well of let's go ahead and do a local podcast that's just all about, educating people that are doing deals in Indy, that are investing in Indy in any way.
There's a lot of out-of-state investors that, do work in Indianapolis. They can't necessarily have eyes there and ears there all the time. So it was just something that we wanted to do. We don't promote anything on it. We don't really do anything like that. It's just all about helping people understand Indy, understanding the neighborhoods, understanding different strategies. And through that, it's got a lot of traction, and it's helped a lot of people out. And to be honest with you, I've never actually looked at the numbers of how many people listen to it or how many times it's downloaded. But I do pay attention when I hear, I have a conversation with, just a random person like, oh man, I love your podcast. It's helped me out so much. Like I've bought 3 deals off one of the strategies you talked about and
that's
those
awesome.
things. So that's been really fulfilling and really cool. And so I feel like it's starting to even gain a little bit more traction than, right now, but I feel like it's helping buyers out, which is 100% what we wanted to do. The toughest thing is when you have and people investing in your city. That's what we want to give back to our city in any way of Indianapolis. So when you have somebody investing in there and they're buying a deal off of a wholesaler that doesn't know what they're doing, or they get ripped off by a contractor, or the realtor messes something up, like that's going to come back and affect all of us. So so it's just like I said, we want to make sure that we're helping out people in any way that we can, and I'm sure some of the people it's not where our advice isn't going to work 100% of the time, but it works for us right now. So
and I just really want to hammer this point for the guys that are listening, because Tucker started it and he had a huge had traction with it, and he started I think 4 or 5 years ago. You've been doing your national one for 4 years, but your Indy one just this past year. And you're getting traction from it. So I want everyone that's listening to think don't think it's too late. It's not, right? Like there's plenty of opportunity. Just get out there, put out content, and people will find you by taking that action.
And the whole local thing, I think anybody can do it, honestly, and it's so much needed. And I think that's why it's just different, right? You see a lot of national real estate podcasts, which is great, but you don't see a lot of localized indie investor pod, and I just think that's different. So I think you always have to think about how can you differentiate yourself from the competition. These are just a couple things that we have been consistent with podcasts, and my national podcast. It's been awesome. I get thousands of listeners a month. I think we're up. We're not the biggest by any means. I think we get about 10,000 listeners a month, something like that. So it's been great. I've gotten a lot of private lenders from it. People are just reaching out because they think, they feel like they know you, right? And they're like, oh, I start talking to them on the phone. I talk about my family, like, oh yeah, your daughter, went trick or treating last week or something. I'm like, how'd you know? Right. But it's pretty crazy because they heard me on the podcast. So
the best thing about podcasts, and it's sometimes you reach out to somebody, it's tough to be like, hey, can we have a half-hour conversation or an hour conversation on the phone? They're like, no, I don't have time for that. But hey, do you want to be on my podcast? Oh yeah, book me. Let's do it. So
I mean, that's been one of my closely held secrets, is this helped me open a lot of doors. So speaking of opening doors, so you guys have been we connected really just the last few months through Collective Genius. You want to talk about what that's done for you guys' business?
That's been, again, game changer, and that was another just component of when we really started scaling the business. So I joined Collective Genius It was about 40 years ago, and someone knew Jason Medley, introduced me to him, and I was doing about 100 deals a year, something like that at that time. We're literally within 2 years, we were doing 300 deals a year, and I really attribute a lot of it to that group. Because I think it's just different. You know, let's go back to sports, for example. When I was in high school, I was the basketball star, right? And I was like, felt like I was the big shot. You know, I'm walking around, get my name in the local paper, and I'm getting MVP of the county tournament, stuff like that. And then I get a full ride basketball scholarship to college. Well, guess what? Everybody was an all-star in their high school team, right? And just think about the NBA. Well, CG is like, it's like the NBA of real estate investors. So now you're not the big shot. You can really learn a lot from other individuals. So many strategies, techniques, systems, you know, people, just the resources that you have. We've gained so much traction from it, and it's been a huge component of our business. Yeah,
and the connections, the affiliates and stuff like that build up through it. And I mean, there's a lot of really good masterminds throughout the nation. So I think no matter what you're doing, if you can't get connected with CG or whatever it is, like find one, and just, even if it's a local one or a national one, I think it's really important. I know it's made a huge difference in our business.
Absolutely. So for the people that are listening right now, I mean, we're saying 300 stepping out of your company. That doesn't hit a lot of people. So for someone that's listening right now trying to work on their first 10 to 20 deals, what advice would you give to someone trying to do their first deals at the moment?
So I say, number one, find a list of some kind that you can work. So I think I just got asked that question last week of like, what would you do with your first $1,000 if you were a wholesaler? 100% I'd buy a list. Yeah. And then, from there, figure out what strategy works for you. When you're looking at lead generation, there's so many different things that you can do in lead generation. We've done just about anything and everything you can think of. We tried it, we failed at it, and we've done well at some. But really, what works for your personality? Like for example, I do not want to be on the phones cold calling people. It doesn't work for me. But some people, that's great. That's what they work to. So figure out what fits your personality, what fits your strengths, and then really work those lead generation systems. And then from there, it's really all about kind of that lead generation piece, but then also just being consistent with follow up. There's no magic formula there's no magic list. There's some lists that are better than others, but really what it comes down to is all the follow up on those lists and making sure you can touch base with each person and really just make sure that you consistently have that follow up with them. I think that's what it comes down to.
So what would you qualify as your top 3 lead sources?
So we started doing TV this year. That's been really good for us. I think that's like our number 1 right now. And then we've always done direct mail. We've always been pretty good at direct mail. It's got a lot of deals for us, but I think TV is kind of overtaken it now lately. And then from there, PPC, we get some really good leads from PPC. I think those are probably our top 3 if I had to list them off. So,
who are you guys using for printing?
Direct One.
Direct One?
Yeah. So awesome. Yeah, they've been really easy to work with. I have nothing but good things to say about them. I'm doing the copy right now for all of our marketing stuff like that. I'll send something in, they'll give me notes on it, and they kind of maybe you should change this word. And there's been sometimes like, oh no, it's okay, I like it how it says, and they were probably right. And that was one of our worst marketing pieces that we sent out. But I'd say with that too, it kind of depends on where you are. I know with a lot of our marketing that we're doing through our direct mail and stuff, we've focused more on, hey, we are a business, we're legit, we're professional, and that's kind of the route we've taken. Since we've done that, we've got a lot less of the phone calls like, hey, take me off your list, stop sending me mail, that kind of thing, because I think it looks a little bit more legitimate. So we've moved away from being that like guy next door, or I've just drove the neighborhood, and so we've kind of moved away from that. Now we're trying to take that professional route, and that's helped us out through our marketing campaigns.
Yeah, the branding component.
Yeah.
I would say too, I know what it's like, to see someone stepping out of their business doing 300 deals and realizing, man, I'm never going to get there, right? And I think that what they don't see is just the many, many years of relentless pursuit, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, throughout the 13 years, I can't even count how many times I just wanted to quit and just get a real job and don't want to do this anymore, right? But I didn't, and I kept getting up and just kept kicking the ball down the field, just kept moving forward. So whatever you have to do, honestly. And then my first hire, we're sitting here writing letters, handwritten, mailing them and stuffing them, and that sounds stupid, but that's what we did because we didn't have a lot of money to do all this fancy TV commercials at that time.
And what I really find too is there's a lot of guys out there that are doing 1 or 2 deals a month or 5. They have better strategies than us. We're in a good situation right now because we have money, and that right. works for us. But there's things that we'll work with a wholesaler on a deal and having a conversation with them how'd you get this? And why are we doing that? It's really good. So I think if you're in that boat, and as long as you're hustling and you're doing the things that are strong to you, that are strengths of yours, you're going to end up being pretty good. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think just to your point, I think that probably around 8 or 9 times I was like, I figured this out, only to be humbled. and then on the other side is why the hell am I doing this to myself? Yeah. And let's just burn this place down, collect the insurance money.
Yeah. And then you get a monster deal and you're like, all right, let's keep going.
All right, let's keep going. So that's works. So what do you guys right now, as far as overhead, to run an operation, to be doing 300 deals a year, what does that overhead look like?
You want to take it? Yeah.
I mean, when we talk about overhead, so a lot of our people are paid off of commissions. Mm-hmm. So obviously their payroll kind of fluctuates up and down. As far as our marketing expense, that's fluctuated too. Right now, I think we spend about $30,000 a month in marketing right now, and that's been going up since we've been doing well. And then other than that, I'd say besides all the commissions and all that stuff, we're spending, I don't know, probably about $45,000, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a big, that's a lot of money, right?
And, it is a lot of money. Yeah.
But I think it's not a lot of money if I told you could put $45,000 and make 100,
right?
And you knew it worked. That's just a numbers game.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It used to be I would put in $5 and make 8, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just has grown over the years.
Sure.
So
it's just a matter of scaling. And Eric Brewer says, "Hey."
Hey, Eric.
He had a great, I love that show that you did.
Yeah.
That you guys did a couple weeks ago. So.
Yeah, that guy's a monster as well.
Yeah.
And then Clay Manship says, "What a couple of ugly mugs."
We love you, Clay.
So Ka Tran wants to know, is a wholesale business that only wholesales sellable? You kind of touched on that a moment ago. Do you want to answer that question?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. You might know this more than myself, Steve, but have you ever met anyone who has sold their wholesale business?
Actually sold their wholesale business. I don't know anyone that's sold it. No. I mean, I've seen like partnerships, kind of talk about like, you're selling a portion of it,
mm-hmm.
but I don't know anyone that's actually sold it and stepped away.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, you'd be like selling the brand is really what that kind of comes into, which in Indianapolis, we do have a pretty good brand. So that might be.
Well, you would have to sell the brand. You have to sell the systems,
mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
policies and procedures.
And the people.
And sell the employees on staying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's true. If you sold your wholesale business and everybody just walked away, you have some systems, but what is that worth, right? So I think it is sellable, but it is limited. I think, in my thought, I thought if I sold the business, I would have to sell it to the people, someone working in the business, and I would probably have to sell or finance it, is what I thought. So I'm not saying no, but I haven't met anybody who sold their business unless it was to their employees.
Yeah, because you generally look, right, like for a lot of businesses, 3x multiplier. And I don't know anyone that would pay a 3x multiplier for a wholesaling business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of the value's in the inventory,
mm-hmm.
And I would say that. So it's not like an education course where you got residual income coming in all the time, subscriptions. So.
And then we see you got a lot of love here. So there's a math there's a math teacher in here, Joseph Prather.
Nice.
Jeffrey Smith says that you've been really helpful for him. So the cash house buyers team, how do you decipher if a person is right for your team when you are scaling?
So we can take that like from kind of where we were to where we are now. Like it really was like just kind of like filling in places like, oh, I need somebody to do this. They seem like it'd be a good fit. But now it's, we're going to have them take a personality profile test and figure out, kind of what their strengths are and what, maybe what they need to improve and those types of things. And then really, do they fit our culture as well? So like one of the big things with us is like really, so, they say that, the best salesmen are those, high A on the predictive index and that kind of thing. That sometimes it doesn't really fit in with our culture and our team and stuff. Yeah. And we've had that on our team and they haven't worked out and we had to let them go. So, we're going to make sure that they might have the right personality profile, but then also to just make sure that, they fit in with our culture and then what needs to be done. Another thing with your scaling too, don't hire later than you need to. So if you're already at like 80% capacity, it's time to hire. So don't get to that 100% capacity and then hire them because you don't have time to train them.
Hire out of desperation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's the worst place to hire from.
Yeah. And we've tried some different things. So what Brian said, the personality test has been good. We've tried, giving people kind of some tasks to see how they do first. We've done some of that before we bring them on full bore. So I think we've definitely gotten a lot better at it, and we have a better system now.
We've got to the point twice now that we've kind of got like too fat as a team, where we had too many people, and we're like, hey, let's cut this back. Like we operate better as a smaller team, and like right now, we only have really 5 people. I count you as part-time, and my wife is part-time. So really like six people, and then 6 VAs is what we operate off of.
Yeah.
So.
And most of the time we've hired fast. I've hired fast, which is totally wrong. Take your time, be patient. and we fired very, very slow. So it's very painful. 6 months of, moving someone around in different positions, thinking they're going to be good here when they weren't good there. Yeah. And that's just not the way to do it.
When we do put an emphasis on culture, it's really easy. You get attached to those people, and you brought them in because you like them and they fit with you and things. And then it's like, we don't really want them to go. Let's try them here. Let's try them there. When reality is like, no, we should just let them go.
You already knew.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I make the mistake often of hiring fast, just like, fall in love really fast. Let's give them a shot, especially for salespeople, but the hiring or firing slow, that's just a slow death for everybody. Everyone's suffering.
Yeah.
It's like mom and dad are fighting.
Yeah.
They're ready for divorce and the kids know it, but.
But honestly, from my experience of those people that we have let go, I've had multiple of them reach out to me and say it might be 2 months later or even a year later, reach out and say, hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate that you did let me go because it was the right time. And, it was, I can see the struggle now, but thanks a lot for the opportunity. So that at least that is a saving grace.
That's funny. I actually had that exact conversation on the way here.
Yeah.
Someone was like, it didn't work out, but I learned so much from you that really helped me.
Yeah.
On my next spot.
Yeah. People is always the toughest thing.
It's the hardest one.
It's always the toughest.
Yep. So Joseph wants to know, he's heard you guys talking about putting on an education course. What do you guys suggest when picking a mentorship?
So I think it really just comes down to make sure that that mentor is actually doing what you want to be doing. Mm-hmm. So if you want to wholesale, don't work with someone that's only wholesaling or is a flipper or something like that. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people fall in that trap. But then also make sure you sit down, take them, have coffee, have lunch, something like that, and make sure that you line up with your core values. We preach out a lot of make sure that the people that you're working with or learning from have the same core values as you, because when you start working a deal together, that's what's going to kind of make or break that deal of how it actually works out, and making sure that you're both comfortable with how it plays out.
Yeah, I think that core values point is really, really important.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people are against paying for mentors, and obviously there's a lot of bad mentors that charge a lot of money and they're not good. But I'm not against paying for mentorship. I think that I even pay for mentors today.
Yeah.
But someone that kind of fits me, that fits what I like. I'm kind of a laid back person. And Brian talked about the core values. So if I had a super type A driven, hey, you need to crush the competition, that's not going to fit me, right? So find someone that's just, kind of, has the same kind of, fits your personality style as well.
Yeah, and I think also you got to look at the mentor for who you are today, because who you are in 2 years from now, you're going to need a different mentor than the one you have today.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. You can easily outgrow your mentor and things. Yeah. I think it's something too of just, obviously not going up and hey, Steve, can you mentor me and things? So actually having a conversation with them and see if there is, some commonality there, and maybe help them out in some way or go do something with them, making sure, have those conversations. All of a sudden, this seems like, they're going to reach out to you and be like, I want to help them out. It's going to be kind of more on them as much as it is on you. I think it's important.
Cool. Let's see. Is there anything else? Yeah, Robert emphasized character alignment. Guys, if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask those questions. So let's talk about right now, November 2020. What are you guys' biggest challenges at this moment?
We'll see after the election now.
Might already be over.
So I think one of our biggest challenges kind of within the business of what we're going through right now is, with how competitive it is of we have never been we've never been in that position where we offer at the door. We've always been, kind of in that boat of our guys go out, do the walkthrough. They kind of, send us over the notes. Brett and I have always been the one to analyze the deals. So and then he's done with that now. I've been doing it. So we've kind of always had this kind of, I guess, just, a lag in that system. But now it's, kind of making sure we have the right sales training going on to where we are ready and we're prepared and we've analyzed correctly so we can offer at the door, because a lot of times if you can't offer at the door, you're going to end up losing, 1 out of, 5 of those deals or whatever. So luckily your sales training you've been doing the last couple of weeks have been awesome. So
I'm happy to hear
it's
that
helped
you
us
guys
out a lot.
it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Our guy got a deal it was just last week. He got a deal and they're like, this Steve Trang stuff is working. It's awesome. So yeah.
Awesome. Very happy to hear that.
I think the biggest thing that we've really been struggling with is, just like everybody else, is the inventory.
Mm-hmm.
Deals are flying off the shelf and we can't keep enough houses. And so we're trying to figure out what's that going to look like, and after the election and then all this stuff next year. I don't know, honestly. It's unpredictable. But I think that's where great teams come in. They have to adjust. I mean, you probably know too, it's like, how many times have you had to adjust your business in the years? I feel like we have to adjust something every year, every 2 years.
Yeah, and what you need
quarter.
to. And it's just like, especially this year. This year's been just so unpredictable. It's something, we talked about earlier of like, we thought it was going to be like, inventory was going to be high and the buyers are going to be scarce. It was the exact opposite. But just being able to kind of take what comes in and just be able to adjust to it. And, no system we're running right now is probably going to be that same system that we're operating, 2 quarters from now. It's going to change in some way.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just, so it's, basically having all those living, breathing documents that they're all up to change. And then also comes down to like having that team input of like, hey, just because it works for me doesn't necessarily mean it works for our acquisitions team. So getting their input of like, what do we need to change? What do we need to fix? And I think that goes a long way.
One thing you've talked about recently, you've had a couple of presentations on, was purpose. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm big on, on purpose. I gave a presentation at Collective Genius about it, and really finding out like your purpose and what makes you come alive. And life is very, very short, honestly. And I feel like so I want to do the things that I love doing and that I'm called to do, and that's different for everybody else. And I think at the bottom line is, I just want Brett to be more of Brett, right? And I think sometimes we lose ourselves in whatever we're doing, right? And that's part of the real estate thing. Is like, I loved a lot of parts of the real estate thing, and that was a great season, but maybe this season is not that. It's something different. And my season is more transitioning as to, hey, this is really, really cool, and I love impacting the people on the team. And I think the biggest impact I can have on them is probably letting them lead the business, right? And that's probably my role right now. But how can I, find my purpose in impacting other things that I'm really passionate about? So, and everybody that's listening is in different spots, right? When I was 28 years old, I got to pay the bills, right? I got to do that stuff. Right now, I'm just in a different season, and I think you got to like identify what season you're in. And I also don't want to say like, hey, just because I'm stepped out of the business, that's what you have to do. And I think people maybe take that the wrong way sometimes, because some people do find their purpose in their business, right? And they enjoy leading their team. And I think that's great. And it's just an individual thing you got to find.
Right. And I think John Maxwell talks about, the seasons of your life, right? I think it's one of the things he hits on a lot. So now that you're in this owner's box, what are you doing?
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that it's kind of cool. It kind of takes yourself back, when you were learning how to do real estate, right? So I've been meeting with coaches, and I've been actually meeting with this transitional coach that kind of takes people through this transition when you go from, he calls it, go from your calling to more of your contribution, right? And this is kind of what I'm going through. So as far as what I love doing, I do enjoy the content things. I have the podcast that I do, and I enjoy speaking and pouring into people in that way. I enjoy missions and really trying to figure out how I can really help some types of mission organizations. Those are some things. So right now I'm still kind of at the beginning stages, and honestly, just kind of enjoying the ride with it, and just kind of taking a step back. I feel like as an entrepreneur, when you do that, people are like, what are you doing? Like you're always doing something, but you have to take a step back and just breathe and like enjoy, like, okay, I don't have to be going 110 miles an hour all the time. Yeah. And I'm just kind of at that place right now.
Gotcha. What about you? What is your purpose?
Right now, make sure the business doesn't fall apart. So, no, I think kind of, as Brett kind of touched on, is now I want to make sure that really, so the business is kind of like my purpose and what I'm doing, not like for life, but it's like what I need to focus on right now. So that's been unique. And then also bringing my wife on team. Now it's like, okay, now we have conversations at home about the business and how it's operating and things. But, really with what kind of that means to me is, so with, you kind of look at the 5 stages of business where you have the startup, the perseverance, the profit, the growth, and the succession. Brett's kind of plan was always like, he wanted to get out of the business. He wanted to get to that point where it was automated and he didn't have to worry about it, and it was kind of going. Where I kind of feel like we've missed a little bit of that phase of like where we can grow. So now it's really digging into, hey, like with our team, where do we want to grow? What do we want to do with this thing? And, we've had this kind of race car that we've kept in the garage for a while, and let's take it out on the track and see what we can do with it. So in really kind of figuring out, working with, kind of coming back to that leadership thing of like working with the team to figure out what their purposes are and what their passions are and what we can really do together. And education is always something that I love to teach. I love to be in front of a room and that kind of thing. So we got some stuff we're kicking around with the education thing that we want to we're going to start doing next year, and I think that'll really bring a lot of purpose to my life.
One thing you guys both touched on was core values. What are your core values?
Well, that's interesting. So as we had a meeting with Gary Harper 2 weeks ago, our quarterly, and he, one of his first questions, he's like, "So Brian, now that Brett's out of the business, like, are your core values still the same? Like, now you're the visionary. So are the core values that you have within the business, are they the same for what your vision is?" And I was like, I don't know. Our vision has changed a little bit. Our team's changed. When Brett first came out with the core values, nobody is on that team anymore from that. And honestly, we kind of went from, when I first started, we went from really just being like a small group, like for, kind of a men's small group, church group that did real estate. And now we're like, okay, now we're operating as a business. So we're actually kind of in the process of kind of going through those, the changing up of the core values to make sure it kind of does fit into what we really need. And the core values that we had, they were, to be mission-minded, be a faithful servant, have smart and simple systems, enjoy the ride, and leave a lasting impression. And really, what those are those are core culture. That's like that's who we are as a team. That's how we want to operate and things. So now we're going to do a vision trip with me and Brett and Ronnie and Randy, the other two guys on our leadership team, and really kind of dig into, set the vision for next year. But part of that's going to be like, hey, let's dig into our core values and what are they really. And here's kind of, Gary went through an exercise with us of like, hey, these are the 5 that kind of stand out for Brian's core values. They really fit in with the team and the vision for next year and going forward.
So, and I think that's a big thing too, is when I came up with the core values, I was meeting with my business coach, and it was really just me, right? And I just came up with them because that's who I am, and I wanted those to extend off, which is most of the time the visionaries' characteristics is the core values. And this is another thing, because when I let go of the business and Brian became CEO, one of my friends says, the business is going to change, right? Like culture is going to change, the core values are going to change. And I had to say, like, I'm okay with that. Yeah. If it does, that's okay. And that was just one thing. And then when he talked to me, he's like, hey, I think we might change up our core values again. At first, you're like, what? I've had those for like 5 years. But then you're
I put it off 2 days having that conversation with him.
It's all right. Yeah. And that's good. It's good. It's just shifting. It's just shifting the leadership and shifting. And I'm the biggest encourager. So
for those guys that are listening right now, that are trying to establish their core values, what exercise did you guys go through to identify? Because you guys are in flux, but Gary did do an exercise with you guys. Yeah, it was a great exercise. Loved it. So basically what he did is he took our, he basically had me write down, or he did it with me, Ronnie, and Randy. He had us take, who are 3 people in your life that you really admire, that you look up to, that have really kind of made an impact on your life. Mm-hmm. And it can't be your wife. It can be somebody related. There were a couple of stipulations in there and things, but then he basically said, write down 3 to 7 traits that you really admire about them or like about them, that you really stood out to you. And then basically from there, he had us look through the list of all 3 of the people and the 3 to 7 things, and then basically kind of look at a sheet of core values that had like the top 100 core values from all businesses all over the world, and like basically kind of sum up all those traits within the 3 to 7 things. And really when you're doing that, even though you're describing those 3 people, what you're really doing is describing yourself. Right. What are the things that are really important to you and stuff. Mm-hmm. And there were 5 that really jumped out on the sheet of like, hey, these are Brian's core values. Mm-hmm. And he's like, oh, why don't you take this one off? I'm like, no, that's important. He's like, yeah, that's why it's core. That's good. You passed the test. So yeah. So I thought that was a really good exercise and things too. And then kind of coming back to that hiring thing, we talked about the personality test and stuff, and he said, how do you make sure someone fits in with your team? And we were brainstorming and coming up with different ideas, like, oh, I would do this, and you could ask this question. He's like, guys, just do this exercise. Right. Like, oh yeah, okay, this works. Well, it's funny because that's actually in our interview. Who are the 3 people you admire most? What do you like about them? And that's part of our interviewing screening process. Mm-hmm. Wow. So very interesting. Was there a book that you've gifted more than any other?
I think two really stand out. I'd say traction and then never split the difference. Yeah. Those are always the two that I keep coming back to and have gifted multiple times. So yeah.
I've actually gifted a book no one's probably heard of, but it really helped me, and I gave it to my brother and my dad, and they started buying copies of it too. And it's a book called The True Measure of a Man, and it's a short book. Highly recommend it if you're in a season that I have gone through where your identity's been attached to your business. Highly recommended that one. That's been a book. And one book that really changed my life earlier was The Millionaire Next Door.
Yeah. It was the first book you gifted to me.
Yeah. And that was just a great book because it really talked about how most millionaires are really just living next door, and they drive a Ford and you would never tell.
Right.
The guys driving the brand new Benzes are broke.
It's sad only because I remember you gave that presentation. I wrote down that book, The True Measure of a Man. Yeah. I haven't taken any action with it.
I have about 20 copies. I'm going to gift it to you.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. So I want you guys to think about a thought, something you want to leave the listeners with while I make a few quick announcements. So guys, if you got value today, please like, subscribe, share, comment. That would really help us with the algorithms so we can help more people. We'd have Cody Pirtle and Jared Graves coming in next week from Houston, Texas. And again, we have our workshop next Saturday and Sunday. If you guys want to check that out, go to disruptors.com/workshop. And then we do have Eric Brewer and the Brewer Method tomorrow, where we're going to be talking about how he's using novations to just do more deals at larger volumes. It's really kind of crazy how that whole math works.
That's solid stuff. I love that. Yeah.
So if you guys want to check that out, again, disruptors.com/workshop or brewermethod.com. So last thoughts.
Just based off this conversation, some things we talked about, I think it really comes down to like figuring out what that purpose is of what you kind of wanted. And Brett, we meet all the time, and he's always asking me like, "Oh, what's your purpose? Like, what do you want to be doing?" And honestly, like I'm one of those people that like I've always struggled with that because I've always just been kind of a people pleaser. You give me a task, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it well. I'm going to probably do it better than a lot of people. Like I have to be given that kind of stuff. So it really takes a lot to kind of figure out like, hey, what is my purpose? What do I really want to be doing? So I think coming into, with whatever you're doing in business and whatever you're doing in real estate, of kind of figuring out where your niche really is and what kind of really drives you and what motivates you and what do you feel that purpose from, and just go after that and tackle that.
Gotcha. Before we go to you, Clay butted in here with a question. Brian and Brett, what would be the one thing you would change about your business looking back on things since you guys have been together? So we'll start with you.
I think just kind of chasing after the shiny object syndrome instead of not spending enough time to analyze stuff. And we were kind of talking about this last night of like he bought a course one time and he called me on the phone and said, "Hey, I really think we should start doing this. Let's do it." And I said, "Hey, let's sit down. Let's have lunch next week and talk about it."
Yeah.
And then he called me the next day and he's like, "I bought it. I bought the big package." So like kind of like being like kind of upfront about like, hey, let's not make any big decisions until we're both on board.
It wasn't a cheap course either though. He was like 40 grand.
That one hurt a little bit, yeah.
So, wow.
So yeah, I think really just kind of taking the time and have those, really basically like kind of have the checks and balances of like, hey, before you do anything huge or before we do anything huge, let's make sure we're both on board before we do it. So
yeah, my partner probably feels that way about me. Anything? How would you answer Clay's question?
My answer earlier would be scale earlier, right? Because for 6 or 7 years I was a one-man show, and then once we started building the team, just wish that I would have probably went through this process a little bit earlier, had the courage to do it.
Yeah.
To step out. So
gotcha.
For me.
And then what last thoughts do you want to leave the listeners with?
I'll leave you with this is there's an author and a coach named Dan Sullivan, and I kind of went through this process when I made this decision, and he calls it the 4 C's. And you can kind of do this with anything. When you're going to make a big decision about anything, is commit to it. Number 1, you got to just go all in, commit to it. The second one is have courage. Take a lot of courage to step out. Take a lot of courage to step in, right? Same thing. The next one is once you get the courage, you get the capability, so you get the skills to do it. And then last is you get the confidence. So those are some of the steps. I committed to stepping out. I had the courage to do it. It was not easy. Now I'm getting the capability, they're getting the skills to do it, and then now they're doing so well, it gives me confidence.
Right.
So,
yeah, Dan Sullivan's great. So I'm assuming you've gone through Strategic Coach?
I haven't actually done that. I've read a lot of his books, but I haven't gone through the actual programs.
Yeah, gone through. It's a pretty good program.
Awesome.
Yep. All right, so if someone wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
I would just probably shoot me an email. It's Brett, B-R-E-T-T, at simplewholesaling.com.
Same here, just Brian at simplewholesaling.com. So.
All right, perfect. All right. Great show, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for flying in.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man.
Yeah.
All right, appreciate
awesome.
it. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, see, we real estate disruptors. Can't nobody touch us. And yeah, we about to give you game. Shout out to Steve Train. Real estate disruptors. They cannot touch us. And yeah, we about to give you game. Shout out to Steve Train. Jump on the Steve Train. We about to give you game. REI's flowing through my veins. And you don't have to look no further. See right here, you gon' learn everything. Shout out to Steve Train. Yeah, see, we real estate disruptors.